common testing workflow. Okay, and this is the testing workflow. Okay, so it kind of breaks down into three broad phases or steps, I would say. The first step is to design the test design. Second step is to flight the test. The campaigns that are part of the test gets flighted, so test flight. And third is to read the test, to understand what actually happened as a function of running the test, what lift did we get or not get, and that's the test read. So test design, test flight, test reads, okay? Now, typically by the time you come to the end of the test, you have more questions about all the media. Oh, well, if this worked at this scale, what would happen at that scale? Well, I'm getting it for these conversions and not those conversions, blah, blah, blah. So there's a lot of different learning agenda, new questions that almost always gets unpacked. Knowing that ahead of time, that you go through a test and you end up with a bunch of unanswered questions can feel like disappointing if you don't understand this is what's going to happen, but it's good and bad. Good thing is you learn whatever you're trying to learn, and then you'll end up with new questions because you're obviously covering new ground, right? So now you're expecting new questions. Now that changes how you might approach the whole problem, okay? All right, three phases: test design, test flight, test reads, okay? Within test design, the first part is audience or market selection. I'm saying audience if it's a split test, but if it's a geo test, it's market selection, okay? And you probably end up hearing the word market selection more than audience selection, but that's that step over there. The first step is to figure out how to split the audiences and split the markets into statistical twins so that you can do the BAU campaign on one group and then do a control treatment or a scale treatment on another group. And the starting part is essentially market selection or audience selection. Okay, step number one. Step number two is what's called feasibility analysis. Okay, and now these are the steps that you don't typically see as you go into less and less mature environments. Second step is to, once you kind of figure out here's my markets, then what you do is you put it through a process called feasibility analysis, where you say, okay, I am going to let's say, for example, hold out. I want to test the incrementality on, let's say, Facebook, okay? So I want to turn off Facebook in certain markets and see how much those markets suffer, right? Let's say, for example, you take 5 markets. You take Rhode Island, you take Maine, you take Nevada and Kentucky and Pennsylvania, so 5 markets, okay? And you're going to turn off Facebook in those 5 markets. And what you're trying to observe is when you turn off Facebook support in those 5 markets, how much does revenue drop in those markets? Okay. Now, markets are moving all the time. So how do you know if it's just dropping randomly because seasonality, or is it dropping because of Facebook? Now, that's where you use what's called anchor or control markets. So you use typically big markets like California, New York, Texas, Florida. Those are big markets. And you take those big markets that represent the national whole and say, how are they moving? Well, it turns out that a simple example is, well, all these markets went down by like 12% because it's off season, and summer is off season for, let's say, winter clothes, and so it dropped by 12%. Now these markets, the other markets that you're testing Facebook, they dropped even further. They actually dropped by another 12%. So now you know that Facebook contribution is actually 12%, right? Relatively, they dropped even more. The relative difference is basically what's measured as lift. Okay. Now the key question in the feasibility analysis: is there enough drop for us to measure it? If the drop is 0.5%, it can be measured. If the drop is 25%, it absolutely can be measured, right? And what is that minimum detectable lift? And there is, we'll talk about that, but there is a number we draw a line in class and say, hey, common sense is 5%. You got to, if you want to design tests, don't design it for anything less than 5%. You're going to design for a lift for at least 5%, right? And it's not always possible, okay? Now, when you're simulating, I'm going to show you an Excel template that I've developed for the class, where you can put all the numbers in and say, okay, does it cross the minimum detectable lift threshold? If it does cross it, the test is feasible. If it does not cross it, the test is not feasible. Okay, so that's the feasibility analysis piece. Okay, number 2. Now, the third part, in fact, there's very, very few people actually do this in market. So this is kind of the big unlock for testing. Okay, you want to go through a mock decision exercise. Let's say you're trying to test for Facebook, right? Now you want to say, what happens if the Facebook lift is 1%? We read that lift is 1%. What does the CPA look like? What does the ROAS look like? What would I do to the budgets? Would I, at that CPA, at that ROAS, would I actually cut the spend? What do I do? Now, let's say on the other side, let's say the Facebook lift is like 25%. What is the ROAS? What's the CPA? What would I do? How much would I increase the budgets by? And what would I do if the lift was 6%, right? So you actually go through what's called a decision matrix and you make mock decisions. You kind of go through what you would do, right? Now, what happens, why this is such a big unlock is that now if you go through the whole test and you come back and you find that Facebook does not work as well as you expected, and you've been working on the program, you're a marketer and you built the whole campaigns by hand and you've nurtured them, you've grown them for the last 8 months. Now it's a report card. And you're saying, well, it's not working so well. The first reaction for most marketers is to reject the test, to say this test didn't work. We got to run another test, right? And so they don't want to accept any results. And there's a lot of emotion attached to it. I mean, we would react the same way too if it was our campaigns. In fact, I do the same thing when I do campaigns now for M Squared, right? Now, that's why we want to essentially flush out all these decisions on paper into what we call a decision matrix before you run the test. So now you kind of reconcile with what you would do if the media works, if the media doesn't work. Now, when the media does not work, it's not the test did not work, right? The test actually worked. It identified that the media did not work, right? So the test actually worked. And now you're able to actually make those decisions with more confidence, okay? It kind of takes out all the emotion of the test and puts it on paper. So when you actually observe the results for the test, you can analyze that with less emotion, with more just in a black and white cold logic kind of a way, okay? So this decision matrix is a big unlock. Now, also what happens is that when you go through the testing process, you will find out that when you go through feasibility analysis and decision matrix, in my experience, if I design 100 tests, I won't flight about 50 of them, maybe even 70 of them. Why? The decisions are so obvious. You go through the whole process and the first time you'll say, oh, wait. If the lift is actually 20%, which is like really like out of the world lift, even then the ROAS is pretty poor. I can never make this work in my portfolio. I'm looking for a target CPA of X, target ROAS of Y. No matter how much the lift is, even my most optimistic projection of lift does not allow me to keep this channel or this media in my portfolio. So I should probably cut the budgets on this, right? Now, that decision becomes obvious when you go through the matrix process, right? So again, these 3 steps in test design, market selection, a lot of people know, feasibility analysis and decision matrix. I think if you go through this in a thorough fashion, I think a lot of times you will end up helping brands make decisions with much more clear-eyed than if you don't. Okay, that's phase 1. Phase 2 is test flight. Okay, now that you've designed the test, you know you want to cut the budgets on certain markets or increase the budgets on certain markets, and you go in and implement it now. So you go and apply geo-inclusions, geo-exclusions on those campaigns. It gets flighted. You monitor those campaigns so that you don't stop those campaigns halfway or you don't introduce new campaigns that cut up the test and whatnot. So you monitor it. Typically, it's about 4 weeks. Most tests are about 4 weeks. If it's a TV test, you typically do it slightly longer, about 6 weeks. For some of the lower funnel channels, you can test for less than 4 weeks. I mean, 2 weeks and whatnot. But the best case, the best practice is usually 4 weeks. Okay, a test flight. Now you do that, and last part is the test reads. Okay. Now again, 3 steps in this. One is the lift analysis. This is what everybody understands, right? You're trying to understand, hey, what would have happened in those markets, test markets, if we had a BAU treatment? That prediction is called the counterfactual prediction. So you're trying to figure out, hey, what would have happened if I didn't do anything to the markets that were different than what I did nationally? That prediction is called counterfactual prediction. Then you observe what happened in market. The difference between those two is what is called lift. Okay. So in a holdout test, you see negative lift because those markets are expected to drop. So you see a negative lift. For a scale test, you'll see a positive lift, right? So, but the idea is the same. But the observed goes either side of the counterfactual, but the idea is the same. Okay, that's lift analysis. Okay. Now, what you'll typically find is that this is the biggest tripping point in market, which is there's a lot of data science libraries like Facebook GeoLift, Google Causal Inference, Facebook Prophet. There's other open source libraries for causal inference available in market now. It's a pretty dense data science exercise. Okay, only data scientists can use those programs. In fact, we have data scientists coming on the class to teach all those programs. But the big unlock is you can also use simple approaches. depending on the type of like design you're working with. You can use a simple difference of differences. You can use simple linear estimation. If you understand what you're doing and you're sort of like, if you're bounding the decisions you're making properly, you can actually use simpler methods for estimation. And that's a big unlock for being able to make all this testing valuable. Okay, and we'll talk about that in a succeeding class. Okay, that's the first thing. It's a lift analysis. Second is, once you analyze the lift, the next thing is to do, okay, what do I do with it? What is the ROAS? What is the CPA? How does it compare to other channels? What decisions would I make? What does this mean for scale? I mean, I was expecting 11% lift. I actually got a 15% lift. But now I'm finding out that I'm going to run this campaign in holiday time, so which means that my CPMs are going to be higher, so the ROAS is going to be worse. So you can go through all that jazz and then identify what decisions you would actually make in market. And you already have a decision matrix. You go bounce it against that, and now you have decisions you've made. Typically, when you come here, you end up having more questions. You're like, I'm testing for A, B, and C. A failed, B succeeded, C kind of somewhat halfway in the middle. Why? Why is the question? Oh, maybe because I had a use case last month where we tested different types of TV, and we tested for broadcast, streaming, and cable TV, and we showed significant lift in cable. But the problem was, it was too expensive. We over-frequencied the market. We were shooting for a frequency of like 14 or 15. We got to a frequency of 25, 27. So therefore, what happened is that the media was super expensive, and the CPAs were very high. So we theorized that actually we didn't need this much frequency. We kind of got we overserved in the market. We think we'll get the same lift at a frequency of 12 or 13. And therefore, the cost of media will be lower and the CPA is more palatable. So that's an insight that we concocted by using our best judgments of both media and business, and then overlaying it on the business decision, which is to investment decision you're making, right? That's the magic. That is a lot of art that you bring to the table. And that's where the skill of the analyst, you guys will come to play in helping shape decisions that are actually valuable. Okay. Okay. Let me pause right there. Questions? Okay.
Madan, do we run multiple tests at the same time with different parameters? For example, so the reason behind the question is because let's say the test read is giving a result that is going to get rejected. Then again, we have to start from the beginning, right? And that'll take another.
Great question. So a good rule of thumb here, Kamal, is that geo-testing specifically is not a little scalpel. It's like a hammer. Okay. So when we design tests, we are trying to like hammer the markets as hard as we can. Okay. We're not trying to like say, oh, let me just like spray a little impressions on the markets. Usually that doesn't work. Okay. So you're trying to push markets. You're trying to move the markets by 5%, 10%. And you need a lot of media to do that, right? So typically you're trying to go heavy on the execution so you can actually observe something, right? But you end up in a situation where you kind of overserve and we end up having to back out and whatnot. But that's okay in many ways than to say, well, I don't know if there's any lift in the execution. So I don't know if this media actually has value, right? The best practice is to go the other way, which is to test in such a way you can observe lift. You can always dial down the execution variety of ways to kind of get it to a place where it's more palatable. That's number one. Number two, you can almost, the best practice always run multiple cells because you're going through the whole process of running a test. Why don't you run like, 3 cells, 2 cells, and whatnot? I mean, 3 cells is the most you can do. We can almost do 4 cells, but it's a little convoluted to select like 20 markets to test with. So you typically do 3 cells in control is a design. I see a lot of times, smaller brands are like, I don't have 3 cells to work. I don't have 3 questions to ask, right? I just want to test Facebook and TikTok. Just go test it. That's it. So it's only 2 cells. Go for it, right? That's kind of how typically it works. Okay.